speaker today is someone we've been hoping would fit into our calendar for months and months. And you didn't see me jumping up and down when he said, yes, I can get there, January 14th. So I will give you the short version of his bio, if that's okay. Kevin Deegan-Krause teaches political science at Wayne State University. Yay, I heard that. His research focuses on political parties and democracy in Europe, with emphasis on Europe's newer democracies and its newer parties. His newest book, co-authored with Dr. Timothy Houghton of the University of Birmingham, is The New Party Challenge, Changing Cycles of Party Birth, Death in Central Europe and Beyond. And that was 2020. It is my pleasure to present Professor Krause to you.
There we go. Great. So it is my pleasure to be here. This room contains some of my favorite people on the entire planet Earth, and probably some of you who I don't know yet who will become some of my favorite people on the planet Earth. So I'm absolutely delighted. And can I say, how to fill a room on a snowy day? Like there are almost no chairs left. There's standing in the back. This is just amazing. And so I want to thank you all for coming out on what is not the nicest of days. But to hear about some pretty abstruse stuff, like accountability, I think has 5-6 syllables in it. Someone can do the counting for me. That's not exactly a crowd pleaser topic to bring up, but it's what I want to talk to you about today. And I want to start just by saying that I hope it's not too basic. I teach political science at Wayne. The stuff that I'm going to be talking about today is based on what I study. It's actually based on research that I did a long time ago and have continued to this day. You'll see that when we talk. I'm afraid that for some of you, this will be kind of old hat. So I hope that at the very least, what I can do is take what you already know and repackage it, reorganize it a little bit in a way that might make more sense and help you take it out to other people and talk to other people. For some of you, some of this may be new. A lot of the topics we're going to talk about are things that you're thinking about a lot, which is, I suspect, why you're in this room. So let me, first of all, just say, and I know we're being recorded, and so that I teach at Wayne, but what I'm going to talk about today is not sort of Wayne State stuff. We're now in a universe where it's really important for me to say that what I'm saying now is not as a Wayne State professor, but as somebody who's learned a lot and benefited enormously from this great local institution that all of you know. This apparently, it's allegedly an old Chinese curse. Apparently it's not an old Chinese curse. It was actually sort of coined by a British nobleman who was trying to say something clever about China. But in my life, this Chinese curse has been replaced by this curse. Because I've spent a lot of time, as my bio indicates, Jerry indicated, I've spent a lot of time in Eastern and Central Europe. In 1990, I went as just having finished my undergraduate career. I went to Czechoslovakia to teach English. I got addicted almost immediately. I came back to the US, did a couple jobs, went back because I couldn't stay away, and ended up spending on and off over the course of about 8 years, 3 years of my life in this country, learning this language and Czech, which are very similar, and watching democracy fall apart. Having just been recently established. And so I've spent a lot of time in my life looking at democracies that are corroding, that are crumbling. In Slovakia, it was this guy who did it. In my subsequent research, I've been sort of looking at a lot of other places where this kind of stuff has happened. By the way, so I ended up writing a doctoral dissertation on this, spending a lot of time, 500 pages of ink spent on this particular topic. But I've been able to spend some time in other places, like in Poland, where we see sort of similar things. We see leaders sort of dismantling democracy. In Serbia, where I was recently been able to be an election observer, and quite a bit of time, as many of you know, in Hungary. This is the one that everybody knows, that gets everybody's sort of hisses. But so I've watched as democracies have crumbled and fallen apart, and sometimes recovered. But what I want to do is trying to bring some of that insight, hopefully insight, into talking about the United States. It wasn't supposed to work this way. I was supposed to go to Eastern Europe and learn what was going on there and then bring sort of American democracy and American insights about how things were working. I was supposed to go there and do that for them. What's happened is actually in reverse, is watching people who fought regimes like the one that I've talked about successfully in some cases, and maybe to take what they've said and come back here. So given that, the big topic of the work that I did, and you can actually see it, the second chapter was called The Accountability Gap. The third chapter was called Accountability in Institutions. This is what I spent a lot of time thinking about because I was trying to understand why democracy was falling apart and why it was falling apart while at the same time elections were going on. So something was clearly happening, but it didn't immediately result in unfree and unfair elections. But there was clearly a kind of pathology that was going on. And the word that kept coming up and over again and again was accountability. And let's see if I can get this to work. Oh no, there we go, was this word, accountability. One of the things that I love to do anytime I take up a new word, anytime I take up a new idea, I like to go to the dictionary, but I actually have a new place that I like to go to. It's not new anymore. It's called Etymonline. So etymology is the study of where words come from. And I love to know where these words actually emerge from. So accountable, when you look at it, simply means I have to give an account. I have to explain myself to you. It's interesting, by the way, that the word count is actually a shortened version of the Latin for to compute. So compute came first, count came second. But it means that I have to be able to go in and give an account of my behavior. For many of us, I think this is fairly familiar if you've ever sat in a chair waiting to talk to the principal, or if you've ever had your boss say, I want you to explain this. The idea of accountability is the idea that you should have to explain what you did and in some way bear some consequences for that. And if what you've done isn't what you were supposed to be able to do, that you should have to do something about it, that you should have to explain it at the very least and fix it at the most. The interesting thing about accountability, as I got deeper and deeper into the academic sort of studies on this, and I don't want to go too much into that, but I find some of these concepts really useful, is that accountability has different flavors or different dimensions. One of the flavors that we talk a lot about with accountability is vertical accountability. So when you think of accountability where there's a difference in power, where there's a difference between the powerful and the powerless. And so in this case, that vertical accountability in politics means the kind of accountability to people and politicians and people. So normally we're accountable to our politicians. They tell us to pay our taxes, they tell us to stop at red lights and so on. But once every 2 years, they're accountable to us. They have to give us an explanation of what they've done, and then we get, for now at least, the ability to go in and tell them whether we want them to continue doing that or not. So vertical accountability is sometimes sort of also called electoral accountability, and it's the accountability of our leaders to all of us. Super important form of accountability. There's no democracy without that particular form of accountability. But as the founders knew when they were writing the Constitution, when they were writing the Federalist Papers, sort of justifying the Constitution, that's not enough to just have people, politicians be accountable to people. Because if you put someone in office and they can do whatever they want, well, the first thing they're going to do is to make sure that they never have to be held accountable again. So you need something that will cause them to remain accountable, to continue to explain themselves, to limit their power, even after the election, before the next election. And so political scientists have come up with this idea of horizontal accountability. And so it's what we often think about. They often call it institutional accountability. It's what we think about when we think about checks and balances. It's what we think about when we think about, you know, the kind of the one thing that all of my students seem to have learned is that there are 3 branches of government. I'm not even sure they can name what they are, but they kind of know there are 3 branches of government. And if you push them a little bit, they might know that they're somehow supposed to have separate powers, maybe, or they're sort of check. These things still sort of keep being learned in grade schools and high schools. But when we talk about horizontal accountability, we're talking about what keeps our leaders accountable in between those election periods. How do they stay answering? How do they stay not going too far because someone else is saying, why did you do that? You can't do that. So that's the other one. And then there are some really smart people who've said, those aren't the only mechanisms, that there are other sort of institutions and organizations in public life. And so there's actually a kind of third kind of accountability. And they're stretching the metaphor a little bit here, but some of they call it diagonal accountability, or sometimes social accountability, or civic accountability, or watchdog accountability. That is the accountability that is in this room right now. Right? We're going to vote in 9 months, 10 months from now, maybe 11, I guess. But in the meantime, there are organizations that exist in the United States and in democracies around the world that are watching, that are observing, that are reporting. They don't have any formal power. They can't tell the president, stop doing something. They can't say to Congress, that's not in your purview. But what they can do is they can observe, they can report, they can organize, they can mobilize, and they can hopefully make people afraid to keep doing what they're not supposed to be doing when those elections, those vertical accountability comes around, or they can inform people who are supposed to be doing that horizontal accountability that, hey, somebody's breaking the rules over there. You need to do something. You need to do something about that. So this is actually going to just form the basis of what I want to talk to you about. And it's not going to be super complicated or detailed, but what I want to talk and think about, come on, you can do it. Why can't you do it? I wonder if it's running out of batteries. Anyway, I'm going to be standing over here from now on and doing this. But this is the frame. So where are we right now? And the first thing I want to do is I want to give a little bit of a caveat, because I realize that the League of Women Voters is not just any organization. That the League of Women Voters, I went to your website, which is beautiful, by the way, went to your website, and here's what I found. I found that the League is proud to be a nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates, political parties at any level of government, but always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. I mean, this makes I want to cry when I see this. Like this is what, maybe because I'm a political scientist, this is what I do. This is the definition of diagonal accountability, right? This is what you do every day. This is what you're doing right now. But I'm aware in that you are talking about not opposing candidates or not opposing political parties. And what I'm going to say actually has some pretty negative things to say about particular politicians and even in some cases some particular political parties. So I want to beware. I just want to let you know that I am going to sort of talk negatively about people in power, hopefully positively about some, although there aren't a lot of positives to talk about in this case. But I want to be aware that I'm coming into a space where your job is to be neutral, your job is to be nonpartisan, but at the same time, the other part of your website, just as beautiful, says that you envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, the confidence to participate. That is extraordinary. And so what I want to recognize is the tension between these two, right? How do we do the top one without at least calling the bottom one into question? And I realize there's nothing that prohibits any of you from running for office and for advocating for certain candidates and so on. But I want to be aware of the tension, and I want to be aware of the League's vitally important role in not actually coming down on the side of a particular party or not. Because now it's one party, next time it might be another party. Now it's one leader, the next time it might be another leader. And so I want to respect those, but at the same time, I want to talk about what I see and what I think is really going on. So here's where I want to start. And by the way, if you're anything like me, by the time that you come around to the question period, at least if you're like me, I've forgotten the questions that I had. So I would like, if you've got questions or if you've got thoughts, raise them as I'm talking. Just let me know with your hand. We can always do more questions at the end, but rather than have those things disappear or be forgotten, I'd rather actually have you bring those up. I want to start by talking about horizontal accountability. And in particular, I want to talk about what it actually looks like. So this is the part where it gets a little bit more technical, but hopefully not too technical. Because in order to make horizontal accountability work, you got to have certain elements in place. This took, for me, and my brain maybe wasn't working that great, but when I was writing my dissertation, this took weeks to sort of figure out. We can get a definition of accountability you have to answer to someone else. But what does it take to actually make someone answer to somebody else? And so these are the 4 frames that I came up with, building on the work of other people. But the idea is for there to actually be accountability, first thing, there's got to be rules. There's got to be something written down that says this is what you're not supposed to break. This is what you're supposed to do. The second one is that what you do has to be able to be seen. If it can't be seen, if you can't find it, then you can't say that's against the rules. So it has to be somehow out there, it has to be visible. If you're going to have real accountability, it's not just, oh, I screwed up. There's got to be some consequence to having you screw up. So there's got to be some kind of sanction that's involved, or the accountability is toothless or meaningless. And the people out there who are supposed to be holding you accountable have to have some reason to do it. You can have all the other things, but if the watchdogs have a vested interest in the thing that you're doing wrong, there's not going to be any accountability. So all of these things are things I think that we need to think about. And I want to talk a little bit about why these are maybe a little bit more complicated than they look. So the first one is the rules. And I think one of the things that we can look at American democracy and say, pretty much all of us can say, and maybe we didn't expect, was how much the rules don't cover all the circumstances. Like, I don't know about you, I mean, I do this for a living. I did not have most of the things that have happened on my bingo card for this decade, right? Almost none of them, because I thought we had a system of rules. I can read the Constitution. I've got a little Constitution that I carry around with me. We kind of know what the laws say. And then someone comes in and does things that seem to like circumvent, violate the rules. Some of you may remember the old Far Side cartoon. One of my favorite old Far Side cartoons has a couple of cowboys sitting behind a covered wagon, and there are these arrows flying in. And one of the cowboys says to the other, they're lighting their arrows. Can they do that? Like, it's not necessarily written down, but if somebody comes into an office who doesn't know or who doesn't care about the rules can't cover everything. The rules can't envision everything that might go on. The rules kind of set a frame for us. But it turns out that so much of what we know about democracy, so much of what we do, is built around common understandings rather than what's actually written down. Howard, I knew you would be the first man with a question.
There are written down rules, but then there are norms.
Absolutely. And some of you may know this book. I love these guys, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. They actually, I don't know if any of you have read this book, these guys actually have the same kind of background that I do, but they're much smarter. But Ziblatt studies old Europe, like 19th century Europe. Levitsky studies Latin America. But they wrote this really amazing book early in the Trump administration, talking about what they saw when democracies fell apart. And what they saw was a whole variety of things. It's a great book. We can talk more about it. But one of the really interesting takeaways from the book is the idea of soft guardrails. So they talk about the kind of hard guardrails on the road, but then there are the soft shoulders, right? The things that keep you from flying over off into the cliff and so on. That there are these kinds of informal rules and procedures that we kind of have gotten used to, but they're not written down anywhere. And so if somebody says, I don't want to do that, you can say, well, but everyone else has done it. But that's all you can say. Because there has to be some kind of social sanction or informal sanction. But if you're a guy who is immune to informal sanction, if you were a person who is immune to shame, this doesn't matter.
No
right?
names.
None. So I think this is super important for us to understand. And it is almost impossible to legislate everything that you would need to legislate. You almost can't sort of foresee every circumstance. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make our institutions as strong, as robust as possible. But frankly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I think because America's democracy has continued relatively successfully, at least relatively successfully for white men like me for the last 225 years, not everybody else in that group, I think there hasn't been a lot of focus on the ways that what we do isn't actually written down anywhere, isn't actually codified. It's sort of cruised along, but it was cruising along on tradition. One of my friends said, you mean to tell me that all of the democracy that I thought was inculcated deeply into American structure was built on a handshake? It was built on some common assumptions, some norms of behavior? Yes, it was. Norms of behavior are fundamentally important. And so I think we need to pay attention to that. It's really hard to rebuild norms once those norms have been broken. So there's got to be some kind of codification in some, at least of the super important stuff. And a lot of the super important stuff that we assumed was written somewhere. Can they do that? Well, apparently they can. The second thing is oversight and visibility. Now, the countries that I studied, a lot of the stuff that was going on, as the leaders were sort of dismantling democracy, a lot of that dismantling was happening behind the scenes. A lot of it was happening in secret and closed committees. A lot of it was happening in places where it wasn't easy. So part of my job when I went there was actually sort of unearth this, to talk to people, to be accused of being a spy and so on. I don't know that that's true. And this is actually an old Czech cartoon. A lot of what's going on right now, a lot of the accountability violations, they're just out there. Like, look at me, violate accountability. Hey, stop me if you can. Right? These rules. So a lot of it is quite visible. I mean, this is the good news, right? We can see it happening. The bad news when you're trying to get to sleep is that you can see it happening. It might be better if we couldn't. That's partially true, because I think we also see quite a bit of effort to actually mask what's going on, in ways that are sort of unprecedented, is to literally hide, to shield people from accountability. We don't know who some people are. We don't know, in some cases, what's going on in particular places and particular ways. So this is kind of a mix in America right now, but you need to be able to see, see what's going on and who's doing it in order to be able to hold anybody accountable. Third thing is consequences. You need to be able to actually force people to stop. There needs to be some reason why something that happens to them if they break those particular rules. The reason you've got the bull in the china shop up there is that sometimes I feel like this is the space that we're in, because if you break the thing before anybody comes and tells you you shouldn't have broken that thing, they can tell you all they want that you shouldn't have broken the thing, but the thing is broken. Unless you have a very ample supply of super glue, you are never going to put. And some of the things that we're talking about, they look like they've been broken. A friend of mine works out in Seattle, and he said in Amazon, maybe not the best example, but at Amazon they have a kind of corporate conversation around two-way doors and one-way doors, right? Two-way doors, you can go through those doors. If you don't like what you find, you can come back. One-way doors, you go through the doors, you've gone back through airport security, it's that little sign that says you cannot come back once you go through this door. I think there are a bunch of one-way doors, right? Administrative competence, all the people who've worked for the federal government for the past 40 years, gone. NATO, who knows, gone. Rules of international norms and trust in the United States to actually at least pretend to follow international law, gone, right? So certain things are going away. So we need to think about what are the meaningful consequences, and if it's something that's a one-way door, how do you hold the person accountable before they walk through that door? Because once they walk through the door, they're on the other side. Fourth thing that's really part of this, that's important in this, is that the watchdogs have to want to do something about it. And I want to dive into this a little bit more because I want to think about what watchdogs we've got and whether they have the desire to actually do things about the things that we've been talking about. So this is our kind of cast of characters. These are the ones that my students know. And it gets a little bit more complicated than this story. But I want to think in this context or in this space about the motivation of each of these to stop those accountability violations when they happen. Right? Because if you want them to stop, someone's got to have interest in doing it. The first ones really come in the presidency itself, in the executive itself. To the extent, and you can probably guess by implication that I'm talking a lot, we said no names, but the executive branch is doing a lot of the things that I've been mentioning so far. So to the extent that you would think about that, you would wonder, well, how could the executive branch be expected to monitor itself? Well, in fact, America has a really strong tradition of having the executive branch monitor itself. There are built-in frameworks within the executive branch to make sure that there are theoretically rules around this where there is a motivation within the executive to do it. Now, at a certain level, every executive should be motivated to not screw things up really badly because every executive wants to be reelected. And more to the point, at least in the past, every executive has had at least a certain sense of responsibility for the long-standing sort of survival of his or her beliefs, his or her political party, the kind of side that they're on. If that goes away, if you have someone who's not motivated by those things, what can do that kind of internal motivation? How can you keep that? And what we've seen is that there isn't any. So one of the first things that this administration did was to go into each and every one of the cabinet departments where there are inspectors general whose job it is to act as a kind of ombudsperson. So if someone is wasting money, or if someone is abused in some way or another, or if someone is acting outside the norms that that agency or organization allows, it's the job of the inspector general to actually say, point. So they work for the departments, but they're supposed to report on what's going on inside the department. One of the first things to go was that. Another thing quickly to go, the Judge Advocate General in the armed services was eviscerated. It wasn't eliminated, but it was eviscerated quite quickly. So in the US military, we also have these internal structures. And we also have in the United States a kind of awkward situation where we have a cabinet agency that is tasked with monitoring violations of law. This is in every country. This is a hard one. It's not just a United States problem. It's hard everywhere. But you have a kind of chief lawmaker and the chief law enforcers. You have an attorney general, and the attorney general's job is, in theory, to make sure that the law is enforced and so on. But the attorney general also works for the president of the United States. Some countries have actually created a sort of distinct, sort of what you would call a fourth branch, kind of equivalent of a Department of Justice that's maybe appointed by two different branches or so on. Not the United States, not a lot of democracies. So this isn't solely an American problem. But at least up until this point, the United States has had a relatively strong tradition of the Department of Justice being able to act independently. When it didn't act independently, you might remember in 1973, people were fired, there was a kind of mad, but the Department of Justice ended up at least trying to do its job. In this administration, that has not been the case at all. Immediately from the very beginning, it was clear that they were going to treat this, and I think there were actually some comments about this, as the president's lawyer, that the Department of Justice is the president's legal arm. And it's gotten to the point now that even some Republicans like John Thune and some others have been saying, maybe this is going too far. Maybe that we're not doing. So you even see on the conservative side, on the Republican side, that there are some real questions about this. But clearly what we're seeing is that the Department of Justice is not doing many of the jobs that it's supposed to be doing. Many of those branches have been eviscerated or removed, or people have been transferred to other things. And the question now is whether the Department of Justice is actually doing things on the president's behalf to actively subvert accountability in other places. I don't think that's actually much of a question. You've even got Republican senators and so on mentioning this. No, really, there is no question about that. So you've got that kind of broader frame. The other thing that you've got is you have organizations that are sort of jointly appointed by Congress and the president, or where there is some kind of mixture of authority between congressional appointment or congressional oversight and so on. So this includes like the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Election Commission, and the more recent Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection. All of these are organizations where you have a kind of mix between Congress and the presidency, but they're executive agencies that are supposed to monitor what's going on both in the executive branch and in the society more broadly. And what we've seen, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this, in almost every single one of these, we've seen an active attempt to undercut the ability of these organizations to exert any accountability, whether that means simply shuttering it, like the Consumer Protection Board, or whether it means eliminating members, like the Federal Election Commission. Ellen Weintraub was simply fired. A couple of members of the Federal Trade Commission, Securities and Exchange Commission has been limited. There have also been a variety of executive orders that said that anything these organizations have to do has to be checked by the White House, which is not in the realm that they were established in. So all of these kinds of organizations, and actually there's a group, and it is a left-leaning group called Citizens for Ethics, and they've actually compiled a list of everybody who's been fired, and it looks like that. So these are, yes.
Where does the Fed fit in?
Oh, I didn't even put the Fed, right? But absolutely the Fed is there. What I've wanted to do is talk about those kinds of institutions that are themselves in charge of exerting accountability over the Fed does it, but in a kind of looser way around the economy. So if you've noticed, yeah, exactly. I'm trying to stay away from, I mean, the list of bad things the administration has done is something we can all talk about. But what I'm actually just trying to limit to, which is why this is only 45 minutes long as opposed to 3 hours, is just try to limit to bad things that the administration has done with regard to accountability specifically, which is the only reason that, admittedly, there are some groups on there that are all. So I'm not going to go deep into the other stuff, but we can certainly talk about that. Here's what I learned in Slovakia. It's not particularly insightful. I think it's probably pretty blindingly obvious to everybody. But if you're looking for the really bad news, is that once you violate accountability, once you break accountability mechanisms, it can allow you to take over organizations or take control of organizations, which you can then use to violate more accountability. So it's a little bit like, sort of a video game. Where you can kind of, you conquer one thing and then you unlock a new level, and then you can use that one, plus the original powers you already had, plus the new organization, right? So now we can use, we unlock the DOJ, and now we can use the DOJ to unlock other organizations and other institutions. We unlock the Federal Election Commission, and now we can use the newly partisan Federal Election Commission to do what we want in particular other ways around campaign finance spending and so on. So every one of these sort of opens the door to another. It's like going down a hallway, kicking on each door until a door opens. Once you get in there are a whole bunch more doors that you can then try and kick down. And so this is kind of the issue, that this can it can snowball. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always going to snowball out of control. There are factors that can dial it back. Many of them are sitting in this room right now. But it is one of the dangerous things about accountability violations is that once you do it, you actually give yourself the power to do more of it. Two relatively brief things that I don't think I need to talk a ton about, which is the motivation of that second, or if you read the Constitution, first branch of the federal government, of Congress, to do anything about this. We can move on to the next one. It really, like, I was at the No Kings rally and someone had a sign that said, "If only Congress were alive to see this." But it just, it's unfathomable to me. It used to be, you would have presidential encroachments, but members of Congress were like, even though you're from my party, God damn it, this is Congress you're talking about here. You can't do that to this time? No, nothing. Yeah, please, thank you, sir, may I have another, right? Exactly. It is kind of shocking. Now, this has to do with partisanship and the way parties are created in the United States. Parties in the United States used to be so diverse and kind of so fragmented that the American Political Science Association was like, please get your act together. Not realizing that getting your act together under a single kind of internally unaccountable leader looks like is it looks like this. And one of the most remarkable things to me, and I'll talk about this when I talk about diagonal institutions, one of the most remarkable things to me is the way that one individual has been able to control, largely from external mechanisms, not internal mechanisms, is to control the behavior of an entire political party. Right? Like bouncing against the people and threatening primaries and threatening anger and all the various things. There's a lot that presidents can do. And if you don't care about what the tradition is about not doing them, you can do them. Yeah.
Just a quick question. One of my frustrations has been that many Democratic representatives in Congress
Yep.
have said our hands are tied, there's not that much that we can do. But it seems to me that there's probably more that they could have done but hadn't done.
Sure.
Are they really as constrained as some of them have made out to be? Or, I'm not sure I understand how all of it
Right.
works in the day-to-day making.
That's a great question. But so clearly we saw with the government shutdown, right? There are a few levers of power that the Democrats tried to do, but the Democrats are playing a game where they're both accountable, sort of trying to maintain accountability, but they're also accountable to their voters. They also, in many cases, actually cared what was happening to people when they were losing their benefits and so on. Like, they were constrained in a lot. That doesn't mean that they haven't failed to use mechanisms that they have, because I suspect there are, and we can probably talk a little bit more, and I suspect there are people in this room who have ideas. They could have done this and they could have done that. The minority party in both houses is fairly constrained. Not exclusively constrained, and especially in the Senate, where you still, for the moment, have the filibuster, although the filibuster can be removed by the majority in the Senate like that. It's a weird rule. It's a rule that requires 60 votes on everything, except on the vote about whether to require 60 votes on the thing. So far, this has been the one place where kind of tradition has said, well, we're not going to keep it because we could use it against the other side in the future. The so-called nuclear option, right? Yeah, just get rid of it, right? Because a majority of the current dominant party in the Senate could remove that rule immediately. So the question, I guess, is how far are they willing to risk those bad consequences, especially if you're kind of losing the media battle, right? If you're not able to kind of present a common unified face. And it is very hard for out parties, for parties in the minority to actually organize around a single individual. Come 2028, it might be a lot easier because you have one person representing the particular political party, but it is kind of in the nature of America. It's interesting, the Republican Party now has had one person in control of that party for 12 years. Right? One person who nominally or de jure actually ran the party. For the Democrats, it's been rather different, right? Because you have is it the leader of the Senate? Is it the leader of the House? Is it the up and coming person? So it is actually hard to do it, kind of solve that coordination problems. And there are lots of different kinds of districts with different kinds of needs. So it's hard. I'm not saying that they couldn't have done better, but I wouldn't want to be in that position. So that's maybe the position that we can do. But I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. And then, yeah, I don't even need to mention this one. The Supreme Court, again, this is kind of remarkable, the degree to which the court has sort of empowered the presidency in a whole variety of ways. And where it hasn't empowered the presidency, it simply said, oh, we're not going to decide about that. So the kind of stuff you may have heard about the shadow docket and things that sort of questions that could be resolved are not resolved or are let go for a while. Until those things get resolved in other ways. There's a podcast you might have heard of called Strict Scrutiny. It's a couple of constitutional lawyers who work on this question, and they've talked about the fact that sort of the question of tariffs right now is up. And I'm not going to talk about tariffs in particular as an abuse of accountability because it's in a different space. But the question is, theoretically, presidents can't do this kind of thing, or at least there's a legal question about whether presidents can do this kind of thing. But the longer it takes for the court to decide that, the more the president can actually shift the tariffs from one kind of set of auspices to another set of auspices, or move them so that when the court finally does rule, if it does rule that the president can't do these things, most of them have been shifted and moved so it won't affect that ultimate decision. But this has been remarkable to me, and it's all the more remarkable because of how insulated it is. I mean, you have a 6-person majority on the court, and they tend to vote pretty closely. Maybe one or two will be picked off in one direction or another, who are there is no vertical accountability for this particular. I mean, the only vertical accountability is the 6-foot vertical accountability. And so there's no way to functionally remove a member of the Supreme Court. And this court, because it seems to have decided that the president's goals and that the primacy of the presidency are its understanding of the way the Constitution works, it makes it very hard to decide. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, by the way, so if I'm making mistakes, please correct me. But from the broader perspective of, yeah.
Where do you put state attorney generals?
So I debated a long time whether to add a whole nother section on this. State attorney, yeah, so here's where I would actually sort of put them. In the sense of diagonal accountability. So the idea that they can't control what goes on at the federal government.
Even though they are elected officials.
Yeah, even though they're elected, but they have a lot of purview within their own states. And the United States has a really strongly federal system, which when people get control of the federal government, they always lament the federal system because we control all the houses. We should be able to tell the states to do what we want, whether that's civil rights or other things. And Democrats for a long time have been like, federalism is a problem. And then when Democrats lose all of the houses and the presidency and the Supreme Court, then federalism is wonderful because it allows California and Michigan and other places that are sort of all in the same trifectas where you've got governor and courts and legislatures to do things. So States attorneys play a really important role, and when we talk about sort of what to do, state level efforts are, I mean, one of the few things that we can actually do here is we can do state level stuff. We can build state level democracy, and we can try and federal proof our states. So we see this going on in Minnesota right now. We've seen this going on in a variety of other places. How do you build a state administrative apparatus, a state legislative apparatus that protects itself from what could go on at the federal government?
States attorney generals have a state budget. They have money.
They do. They do.
And manpower.
They do. So, and women power as well. So, but states can do a certain amount of stuff, right? But what's really interesting, and this isn't just a Republican thing, I think, but what you've probably noticed is that when people are in power, the federalist stuff isn't that important, right? Like you can sort of overreach, and you can say, well, federal law kind of mandates that we were able to do stuff. And both the Republicans and the Democrats are really excited to talk about states' rights when they're not in charge of the federal government. And then when they get in charge, what? Yeah, exactly. So if your state's rights contradict my federal rights, I'm going to do the federal stuff every time. There's no intrinsic, from what I've seen, belief in states' rights by any major American political party. It's just about whether the state is a better venue for doing the thing rather than. So that's exactly where I would put the states. There are some other diagonal mechanisms as well. Mechanisms, this isn't quite as formal. These things aren't written down, but for these, you want to be able to have some consequences, and often that's consequences on people being seen to do something wrong. That assumes that they mind being seen for doing what's wrong. And you want them to want to do something. And I don't think I have to say a lot about this, but I can just sort of give you a list of organizations that do this work, and then think about what's going on in these sectors, right? So think about what's going on in the journalistics. Now, some of it is overt, right? So we see this in CBS News. We see this in a lot of kind of other media spaces and media organizations. I'll talk about that in just a couple minutes. But we also see journalism in the United States having a real economic struggle just to survive. Anyone who's lifted a free press lately will know what that's like. And the Philadelphia Gazette just closed last week. A variety of things, sort of, at least the traditional journalism that a lot of us grew up with, is gone, and it's not always clear what's replacing. Fortunately, we've got things like Bridge Michigan and Bridge Detroit and other pretty amazing resources. It's not actually that expensive to do good journalism, but the old mechanisms of journalism that we're familiar with are under fire, and they're also formally under fire by an administration that has actively, through lawsuits, tried to sort of cause them to change their course on particular things, and it's under fire from media conglomeration, right, and the kind of monopolization of this in a relatively few hands. Many of them are not particularly favorable to independent journalism. So that is a big sector, and it's under a lot of threat. We can also see this in nonprofits. So nonprofits have struggled with financial resources, and there have been constant sort of talk and rumors that the next step in the accountability chain here is that nonprofits start getting audited, that the IRS starts looking at nonprofits to see whether they're doing the right. That's already started to happen in a few places. It's certainly part of Orban's playbook in Hungary and a variety of other playbooks. There's a lot you can do to nonprofits. I suspect about half of you in here have worked for or in or run a nonprofit, and half of you know how incredibly wealthy nonprofits are. And you know that the mere threat of a lawsuit or the mere threat of an audit can sometimes cause the organization to fall apart. So nonprofits do an incredible amount of work. This is what's going on here, but they're also really vulnerable. What happens when the League of Women Voters gets audited, right? And audited in a severe way by the IRS? What happens when a variety of other organizations face that same kind of threat?
A subset of nonprofits are foundations, which is the funding source.
Absolutely. So foundations in this space as well. And philanthropy is facing that same kind of thing. We've seen this kind of upward, just river of income in the United States, sort of going to those upper echelons and including those upper echelons in philanthropy. But it also means that there's a much more concentrated philanthropic space, and so it puts a lot of this at risk. And that's part of that kind of concentration. We could have another whole conversation about concentration of resources in the United States that is affecting a lot of this. There's also obviously threats to academia. And so we could talk a lot about that. Not that we as academics always do enough to get out and sort of do our job to actually work on this, but academic institutions are under threat. And I will say, as someone who was at Wayne State University, I saw immediately how threatened the university felt when it was happening. It doesn't happen to every institution. It just has to happen to a couple, and then everybody else starts to think about how do we not get nailed for this as well. And then, I mean, for some of you, I suspect, those of you who haven't worked for nonprofits have probably worked for law firms, and you saw immediately how many of those law firms simply caved in, and the same for a lot of corporations, right? That they've simply sort of said, please do what we want. If you saw the inaugural, and you saw who was sort of standing on in the Capitol, on the dais, you know the role that corporations that for a while were supporting certain kinds of things suddenly stopped supporting those things because it was no longer in their financial interest. So a lot of the sources of diagonal accountability have been undermined by the use of federal power by the administration and by the undermining of accountability that keeps you from using your power against these particular institutions. Last thing I want to talk about, vertical accountability. League of Women Voters. This is home for everyone here. This is what you all do. I work with a group called Voters Not Politicians. We got that word vote in there. What we are concerned about is the moment that people go in and cast their ballot for a particular person as the critical moment in democracy. You need all the others, but just horizontal accountability alone, that's just enlightened dictatorship, right? It's not gonna sell. You need the people to actually say, we don't want that anymore, to be able to make that shift. Turns out, and I only learned this over 30 years of diving into it, elections are super complicated. So this is the graph that I actually use with my students in my election course. Every single question mark there is a question you have to be able to answer to run a good election. And I'm not even trying to make it big, but if you want to go into this, election administration, electoral laws, electoral systems are incredibly complicated. Most of us, and I was this person, walk in on a Tuesday, we make a little mark in a circle and we walk out. If you haven't worked the polls, I would encourage you to go and work the polls. A lot of people I can see have done that. You will know how incredibly sophisticated and complicated it is, how incredibly detail-oriented everyone is in that particular process. I've stayed until 2 in the morning to find one ballot, which we sort of couldn't figure out where it ended up. Like, I wish every single election denier had to actually work the polls to see how faithfully this process is pursued. Yes, sir, you've been very patient.
How do I find that? Is that on
We talk. No, this is my own insular creation, but I built it around something called the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, but we should have a conversation. So these are the kinds of things, which means that every single one of these questions is a place where you can put a little wedge and hit it with a hammer, and you could theoretically break the system. These systems, they don't run themselves, they're not obvious, and so on. There's a kind of the Einstein of sort of American political science, a guy named Robert Dahl, in 1971 wrote a book called Polyarchy, and he tried to say what's at essence to democracy. Like, what are the things that you absolutely need to have for a democracy to work, and you can't get rid of. If you lose any one of these, then the system kind of falls apart. So this is sort of a simpler version of what's there, but you can see, you have to be able to vote, you have to be able to be elected, and so on. Some of these we've actually talked about a little bit, and some of these I think are at risk right now. So the ability of people to organize with one another, so the work that you all do, that nonprofits, now no one's making us disperse yet. No one's sort of forcing us to not have these kinds of meetings, but that's not where you do it if you're clever. Where you do it where you're clever is you do it with the financial resources of the organization, you do it with the underlying legal frameworks for organizations and so on. That's how you break apart the right to organize and associate. In terms of freedom of expression, again, you sort of work in various ways in a world that is media controlled and media dominated by a few areas where most people get their news from just a few spaces. It is really, really vulnerable, and where alternative sources of information aren't easily available. 1 in 5 Americans gets their news primarily from social media, which is owned by just a few people, and another 40–50% get it from, actually more than that, get it from organizations that are heavily dominated by just a couple of corporations, which try to do their best. I think all of us know local journalists and others, they try, but for the most part, there is not this this idea that we should be going out and finding questions and answering them. It's a lot of it's market-driven, it's sensation-driven, and that's the kind of not pernicious version of what this looks like. So this stuff is at risk, and I think it's more at risk than I used to think. Like, I am really worried about this, not just because social media is light and sort of frivolous, but because it opens the opportunity for organizations to control what we're seeing in ways that we don't even see. And back when I said in order to have accountability, you have to see that it's going on, if you don't see the things that tell you to look more closely at what you're seeing, you're not going to know that they're there. Yeah.
Not just on vertical accountability, not just electing politicians, but also ballot initiatives.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's going to follow.
It's basically a proactive initiative as opposed to reactive, which is just voting for the candidate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm getting a little feedback or something. Try to keep this low. But absolutely right. And I did not include that, but only because I wanted to let you go home at some point. But one of the things that I would say as we do this, we want to think about where money is coming from. And anyone who's interested, there is a ballot initiative going on. Howard, no one has ever teed up the ball better than I will. That's right. But you even know when to tee me up. So there is, one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest things that you've probably seen is the way that money has flooded into elections. I don't have a broadcast TV, but my mom did, and every September, October, November, on her television would be just this torrent of trash, crap, right? And paid for by money from God knows where, because they don't actually have to tell us, and so on. And so there are a whole variety of ways in which this is under threat, but one of them is at that actual election time where that money is coming from. There are ballot initiatives, including this one called MMOP, Mop Up Michigan, Michiganders for Money Out of Politics, that would actually remove the ability of state-regulated monopolies, of companies with corporate contributions, and tighten up a few other rules around issue ads and so on. As Howard said, we can't do everything, and we often can't do things at the federal level. There's no way to do this at the federal level except through Congress, which doesn't seem to want to do anything. But in Michigan, we have the right of legislative initiative, and so we can actually put something onto the ballot, and then we can all vote upon and bypass the other systems that are there. So if you want to sign this, I brought a couple with me. I'm sure you do. Exactly right. And so we've got that as well. I'm glad, because I don't think I brought enough petitions. So there is that. I suspect half the people have signed this in the room. And yeah, please do. Yeah.
If you're interested, we're really pushing to get
Yes.
these signed in order to make the deadline.
That's right.
Anyone here, if they could just take one, even if they could get one or two
Yep.
signatures, I can provide it for you. We really need to push.
That's right. And this isn't a advertisement for that, certainly not a paid advertisement, but the organization has just gotten a big chunk of support. They've got a formal campaign manager, and so I think you're going to see this really kind of taking off at this point. And so any effort that you can provide to this, I think I can say this regardless of the partisanship of the organization and so on. This getting some of these big sources of money out actually helps people have those freedoms of information that they actually need, or at least eliminates the overwhelming flood of information from outside sources that don't necessarily need to be there. The other ones, the right to vote, the right to be elected, and so on. We can talk a lot about this, but what I just want to mention is that a lot of these things are under threat in ways that I didn't necessarily expect for the United States. First thing I want to point out is that you don't have to do a lot in the United States to shift this flow of an election. The last 7 presidential elections have all been decided within a kind of 5-point swing or 5-point margin. And more recently, it's been 1, 2, 3 points. So it doesn't take a lot to shift a presidential election. It doesn't take a lot to shift certain other kinds of elections. And so what can an organization do? Well, I work with a group that's been trying to produce a list. There's a lot of stuff that you can do if you want to mess this up. This is actually the report of the Brennan Center. If you don't know the Brennan Center for Justice, they have a remarkable website and they do good work. It tends to be sort of left of center, but very responsibly left of center. Like, they're not afraid to say they were wrong. They're not afraid to call both sides for problems. But the the Brennan Center has said there are 4 main areas that they're afraid of. I can give you the link to the article. The first is related to election rules. The second is related to election officials. The third is actually related to the people who are actively trying to undermine election. And the fourth is sort of withdrawing or retreating from the federal government's past role of actually trying to defend voting and defend free and fair elections. And what Brennan Center has found in a variety of ways is that there are federal level efforts right now to actually sort of rewrite those rules. The president actually issued an executive order, the kind of applicability of which is unclear, but it creates a kind of chilled atmosphere for what states are doing. That would, for example, require citizens to present proof of citizenship at voting. Now, it's argued that states don't have to abide by this, but some states are worried about it. Other states have tried to do a variety of initiatives. In fact, if I can borrow the sheet of paper with the QR code on it, do we have that one for the Decline to Sign campaign? Jerry had it. Not that I have to show it. Anyway, one of the things that you heard at the very beginning of this presentation was the idea that there will be presentations here, and hopefully, so the statewide league is doing it, and hopefully we can do this here. I think we can find you some people who can talk about this. But the idea that there are currently signatures being circulated, or petitions being circulated to require proof of citizenship, which I think a lot of you understand would have a chilling effect on people who don't have IDs, who have changed their name like I have, so my birth certificate doesn't correspond to what's actually my current name. So this would cause a huge amount of problems, and the federal government is currently trying to sort of promulgate these things and persuade states that they have to do these particular things. And the Department of Justice has been asking for voter rolls and so on. So there are active efforts to try and do this. We have also seen that federal law enforcement has been involved at local levels. Right now it's around immigration, but there's no guarantee that it would stay just around immigration. There's no guarantee that National Guards couldn't be federalized around election periods, that states of emergency couldn't be declared, and so on. I hope it doesn't go to those places, but those are the kinds of, I mean, let's put it this way. At this point, every point where I said, I hope they don't go there, yeah, they've gone there. So I think that's a super important thing. The second one is targeting election officials, and the Attorney General has created a task force to do this in a variety of states, particularly states that voted the other way in the past presidential election. It seems to be kind of built around who votes what way, and there's just an enormous amount of this kind of targeted behavior. Things that look in the abstract to be sort of, impartial, but then are so obviously sort of geared only toward one party that it's clearly a partisan effort. There are also clearly efforts to support those people who have done things like seize ballot boxes in the past or stop prosecution of people who have broken those laws. I haven't talked about this, but the president's ability to pardon people is an incredible get-out-of-jail-free card for anybody who would do anything with regard at any kind of violation of federal law, not state law, but any kind of violation of federal law. Which is pretty extraordinary. And then, the big thing is we relied on the federal government to enforce kind of free and fair elections across the United States. The federal government doesn't have a big role in a lot of things in the United States, but on this, with the civil rights movement, it took a big role, and we're seeing a systematic kind of retreat from that all across the board. And not only a retreat from it, but now joining the other side. Right, joining those whose elections who do not seek those free and fair elections. So I have to say, the more I've looked at this, I tend to focus a lot on the horizontal accountability. This stuff has me worried, and largely because it doesn't take a lot in the current United States environment. It doesn't take a lot to politicize an election. It doesn't take a lot to sort of create doubt about the results. We've already seen that that's easily successful in some places with certain groups of people, and so the real question is how do we sort of figure out what to do about this? And I wish I had a whole list of things. I have a list of things. They're a little bit vague. This is where you're like, okay, what do we do? And I say, well, let's. But let me try some stuff on. So this is the first thing. Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Let me do the next one. All right, this is the one. It's the giving up The people who gave up aren't in this room. So this is preaching to the choir. This is preaching to the priests here. I think we all know, and sometimes it's hard not to despair. Like it's hard to think, oh my God, where is this going? Like what's the next? But we're here. We're going to do this. I don't need to tell you to do that. Okay, so sort of to direct things. This, I think, for me, and this is a kind of work in progress for me. I think about this a lot. This, for me, becomes first priority. Like being aware of any threat to that vertical, any threat to the free and fair conduct of elections, either in the run-up to those elections, in the actual election day. I'm planning to work the polls that day, but it may be that I do something else because those polls need to be defended from the outside rather than worked on the inside. But anything you can do, any opportunity you see, and you're at a meeting of the League of Women Voters, like this is the perfect place, but pay special attention to every single thing that would allow you between now and November of this year to make sure that these elections are free and fair, to make sure that any kind of interference doesn't actually affect the result, or that interference can be stopped before it gets started, or at least to send a signal that we don't want that kind of interference. Whether they pay attention to that is another question. This, I think, is absolutely crucially important. Second thing, you're already doing it. You're here, I'm here, we're all learning this together, we're teaching. I wish I had sort of magic bullets. I'm learning this at the same rate that you are. I'm watching what's unfolding, I'm trying to piece it together, I'm trying to talk to everybody I know to make sure. So pay attention to this stuff, especially the stuff around free and fair elections coming up in November, but also around those broader institutional questions, because we're gonna need to do those later. But learn those things and then tell every single person that you know. Every single person that you know what you learned. Tell them in ordinary plain speech, hey, I heard this. Do you know about that? Tell everybody about this. And I think it's really important to think about who you tell. And so this is something, and I don't know how this is going to land in this particular, I suspect probably better in this group than others. I don't know if any of you have heard the sort of meme so this emerged in Britain, but the leopards eating people's faces party. And the idea is that you vote for the leopards eating people's faces party, but there's no way the leopard's going to eat your face, right? And so this emerged in Britain, and I want to say at a certain point, and this happened to me in February when I saw a certain friend of mine's child. I shouldn't even say this, but a certain opportunity disappeared for the child of a friend, which was terrible. Like this poor young person doesn't get to do this thing. But I wanted to say to the dad, like, oh, you didn't see that coming, right? There was no way that your child was dependent on something. There's a tendency to have some kind of schadenfreude around this. And I think that's exactly the opposite of what, have like your schadenfreude moment, right? You're like pleased at other people's disappointment moment, and then step right through that and go immediately to saying that is someone you can tell your story to. That is somebody who is now more likely to listen to you than they were before that thing happened. So my suggestion is look for people with leopard wounds, right? And latch onto those people, give them some Band-Aids, give them some ointment. Those are the people. They will listen to you. They have been hurt by their own. They may not even be willing to admit it. But those are the people who can be persuaded that this is a problem. And so I would just really encourage, reach out to everybody you can. There is no way that democracy can be restored in a fundamental way without the help of moderate conservatives in the United States. It just simply cannot happen. And I think we're seeing a lot of moderate conservatives saying, oh, this wasn't what I thought was going to happen. Let them have that. Let them do their own work on that. Friend of mine, emerging friend, is like, I have a lot of atoning to do for what I've done in the past. Some people may be there, some people may not, but find your allies in that middle space where people can do that work. All right, longer term. Here's where I think super important. You're doing one of these things. You're in this room. You're supporting Diagonal. So League of Women Voters, independent journalism. So support Bridge Michigan. Now, this isn't paid advertisement for them, but support Bridge Michigan, support other kinds of independent providers. Those nonprofits that you think are fundamentally important, support those. Those kinds of organizations, those political parties, those within political parties who are working toward this end, especially if they're in the party that is currently causing some of the accountability problems, like support those people if you can. But anything you can do to provide greater watchdog, greater visibility, greater accountability, all of those things. Journalism for me is an incredibly important thing. Encourage people to get off social media, encourage people to sort of break the links with those things. It is possible to do. I've cut out Chrome, I've cut out Facebook, I've cut out a whole variety of different things, and I'm no more information poor than I was before. I'm able to find these particular things. So cut those things out, really monitor where you're getting your information and help other people do the same. I think this is crucial. This is a long-term stuff. This isn't gonna shape what happens in accountability in November, but it's absolutely essential for that future step. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
I could write it down, but, what are your top 3 organizations that we should give to? Because there's so many,
There-
it's overpowering.
I don't know that anyone wants to listen to my list. Everybody's got their own list, I think. So tell you what, when we get to the question, let's actually ask people when they talk, in order to ask a question, they gotta say something that they care about. So for me, Bridge Michigan is super important. That's where I get my independent news about the state. There are a variety of foundation-funded sources. They tend not to be the mainstream ones. So I tend to look at the Brennans. I mean, a lot of my favorite groups are the ones that were listed, but sort of organizations that provided the information that made the basis of this presentation. But let me finish because, believe it or not, I am almost done. I think supporting institutional reform, we've got to get through this. We've got to get through this breakage of accountability, but we can't just get through and hope that it's going to get better. We actually have to think about what that looks like in the bigger picture. And there are ways to change and modify America's institutions. This is going to require, if the current party ever is not in power, this is going to require the new people in power to actually be willing to bind their own hands, right? If the people not in power, if what they learn from this is that the way to run a government, the way the current administration is running it, then we are lost, right? Because if this becomes the norm, then we descend into countries, we don't descend into dictatorship, but we descend into countries I've seen like Albania and Georgia and Serbia, where every election is about democracy. Every election is about elections. Every election is about gaining power so that you can do to the other side what they did to you. You can live like that for a while, but you're not going to live well. And for me, that is absolutely the critical moment, is to be able to say, all right, we need to limit this abuse of power, we need to reestablish accountability, and we are just as happy to be subject to accountability as the other side. Super hard to do. We're seeing this in Poland and a variety of places. We're going to see it in Hungary if Orban ever loses. When the new folks come in, they're going to be tempted to do exactly what the other folks did, if only to get their people the other people's out of office so they can do their job. This kind of thing creates some real strong barriers to recovery. It's like having an illness. I've been sort of mulling the idea of writing an article called The Long COVID of Democracy. But it feels like that's what we're in, right? We don't just get over this and go back and say, oh, it's a nice new day. We have long-term chronic symptoms of this. And that actually brings me to the last thing that I want to say, which is we have to treat this as something that we do in the long run. I think for a long time, Americans took democracy for granted. It just ran, it just worked. Didn't work great for everybody, it didn't work great for people of color, it didn't work great for women, but it worked, and it kind of chugged on and on and on. And we get a shock to the system, we get a massive accountability shock of the kind that I've been talking about. We don't just give up, we get sad, we don't despair, and we say, like every other country that I've seen, Slovakia and everywhere else, we say, all right, that didn't work. We're going to circle back around, and we're going to do this again, and we're going to do this again. And it's going to be sad, because it's not going to be what we thought we had forever, but it's going to be better than what will have if we don't do this. And we have kids and grandkids and others to think about when we're ready. And they're better than us, but they're not the ones responsible for solving the problem. It's us.
Okay, quick question regarding accountability. One of the things, I read online occasionally, there's people saying that in order really see that, I mean, how do you view that whole situation?
So I'm going to sit down for a second because, so I work with some people who work very heavily on Poland. And Poland is in the middle of this transition right now. So in Poland, there was a regime that for 8 years sort of, undermined democracy. And I'll hand this out so people can ask questions too. But a government that undermined democracy, that packed the court, that kind of broke a lot of rules. And because they had packed the court and because they had broken those rules, when the new government finally, when their abuses had been bad enough that people voted them out, and the new government came in with pretty good intentions and pretty strong will and strong desire, they found themselves unable to do a lot of what they promised. The Supreme Court struck down what they wanted to do. Their trials were accused of being punitive, were accused of being revenge trials. So somebody breaks the law under the past administration, you're facing this incredible dilemma about prosecuting them and looking exactly like they look to you, right? And we actually saw this between 20. We saw this between 20 and 24, right? When people sought to hold Trump accountable for what looked, and I'm no legal expert, but what looked like, especially in Georgia, like things that should be held legally accountable, that then gets construed as weaponizing the Department of Justice, right? And so the one option is to do that and risk looking just like the other side and making it look like power is just being used to punish, or not doing anything about it, right? And then letting that kind of behavior go unpunished, go undeterred, and so on. This is the dilemma that this kind of behavior creates. And there's no good answer to this. At least the countries that I've seen, they have not found. I mean, the best you can do is try to be very limited in who you prosecute and how, to be incredibly clear about why you're doing it, to have all and then that doesn't even work. So I wish I had a better answer on that. This is not a place where I'm optimistic of the culture of this country and our ability to, but I'm not optimistic in the ability to kind of reset the balance and to make politics seem like it's about something other than one side fighting the other with all the tools available. And that's the problem that faces any new administration if it were to come in, is how to actually use those tools and to find that balance between something that looks punitive, that looks revengeful, and something that's simply trying to enforce laws as they were written, to sort of restore that balance of accountability.
So could this only work if the crimes are egregious enough? Like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking Nuremberg.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Let's not get there. I was just there in March. Like, yeah. So sometimes when things get bad enough, then you can actually hit the reset button. Let's pray to God we never get bad enough for that to be the right solution.
Or South Korea.
Yeah.
Where they're now asking for the death penalty.
Yeah, it's
For the president. So,
But look at what's happening in Iran right now.
yeah.
With the
Right. No, I mean,
people killed.
yeah. No, and how do you not punish that? At the same time, how do you not punish that? Right? Like it's a really, sir.
So
I'll give this to you.
I'm the first one who gets a microphone. So the institutional safety valve on avoiding prosecutions was supposed to be impeachment, right? And what that was all the elites banding together, 2/3 of them anyway, and agreeing that this is way beyond the pale, whether it's a defined rule breaking or just some various high crimes and misdemeanors, and that consensus would out he goes, and that's the reset button that exists in the current Constitution that we have. However, I'm pointing to what's above your head there: support institutional reform, because the institution of impeachment does not work when you, to go back a few slides, don't have people who want to make it work. So, I mean, you're going to need an institutional reform on impeachment so that we avoid this either or of do we prosecute or do we just let it go? And it needs to be that the elites of the country come together again in a way that they're really split now, and agree that this is the norm, and we, 2/3 of us, will enforce it. So thank you for letting me make my speech.
That's absolutely right. And I think most of you probably know the U.S. has the hardest to change constitution on the planet by a long margin. Like every other country, and I know we've got to wrap up, we kind of took questions during, so we don't have to have a...
That's exactly what I was going to say. Maybe we can keep to questions for maybe 10 more minutes.
fine.
The snow's coming down and we're starting to lose some
Let
folks.
go as they go. So I'm
Yeah.
going to hang around for a
Thank
while.
you.
So if people do want to ask us questions, but yeah. So Gary, I think that's right. I mean, but how do you? So if you have an incredibly hard constitution, how do you change the constitution that's incredibly hard to change to make it easier to change?
States are laboratories of
States are laboratories of democracy.
Do it in a great state like Michigan.
All right.
We have the ballot initiative. Put it on there. Show that it works. This is a.
Are you talking about proportional representation by chance or other kinds of electoral reforms that were?
I wasn't going to go there ostensibly, or overtly, but it's a long-term process. You can't touch the federal government very much at all. So all you can do is set an example.
You can do what you can do.
Open property.
That's right, and that's why people are here. Let me take just a couple more quick questions, and then and thank you for your patience. Yeah, so actually I'll start there and then there. So.
I have more of a comment than a question. I'm really depressed because I lived under a brutal dictatorship and I lived the consequences of losing democracy. And I don't know how to explain it to people because lived experience, it's not like reading a book or hearing about it. I don't know if people have to see the bodies of people who died under torture with their emaciated bodies and gouged eyes. I don't know what it's going to take for people to stand up and do something. I know everybody here knows the danger, but the vast majority of people don't even care. That's my comment.
I think more people care than you might think, but don't necessarily see yet how it impacts them. And that's why I think this importance of talking to everybody. I mean, sharing your experience, sharing, and seeing the parallels, I think that people learn from that. It can happen anywhere. And that's I think that's the space, because we are in the space now. I think that's coming. People are starting to realize that, right? And I think maybe if both sides feel sort of abused enough, maybe there's consensus that both sides might be willing to stop the train and start actually reforming. But that's going to require a lot of courage by both sides to actually work together, to limit themselves from being able to strike back against the other side. I mean, it's going to take is a lot of forethought and a lot of restraint. And restraint is not something that our society or our media space or anything currently encourages. But it happens in rooms like this. And I'm depressed with you. But I don't know what else to do except just keep going with this and telling this story, and telling your story, and telling, I think, all of our stories. And run for state senate. And run for state senate. Let me go here, yeah.
Support ACLU, PBS, NPR. My question is about corporation accountability with what Ford did to their employee yesterday. When I'm at work, do I have the First Amendment right to express an opinion? Okay. Suspended? Yeah, okay. All right. I'll never buy a Tesla. Do I have to never buy a Ford? But, so, thanks.
Good point. Other questions? Let's do two more real quick. I'm sorry, you had your hand up too.
I have a concern. I have a 20-year-old son. I've been involved with political things his whole life. Yet, I just see how young people, there's a total minimization of civic education in our schools, and I am very concerned how it's multiple generations actually that this has happened with, and how do we, how can we build a future when we have these generations of young people who really, don't know how to really participate?
Right. I mean, support your schools, obviously. I mean, I think that's a more, there's no good answer to that. But part of it is us, right? Part of us, we know 20-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 8-year-olds. And when we go to events and we take them with us and we talk to them about what we're doing, I mean, I know it's small scale, right? The big scale is sort of making this work better. I know a lot of teachers, though, who work really hard to do this kind of stuff, and they're being drowned out by other sources.
So as far as organizations, can I
Yes.
put a plug in for the Michigan Center for Civic Education?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. There was one more hand up that I saw. Mary Schusterbauer. You have the last word, Mary Schusterbauer.
So the thing I'm going to say is kind of a commercial, and then Kevin's going to tell me how much he agrees with me, right, Kevin? So the thing about, like, you know, how do we eat an elephant one bite at a time? And that's kind of what you've been talking about, is all the little things we can do. But I don't want us to ignore elected leaders at the very, very local level, school boards and city councils, because that's where we get our toes wet. Kevin used to be a school board member. You know, that's how we learn, that's how we, but yeah. Yep. Any of those things where you're elected and you see, oh, I can do this, then you know you can do the next thing, and you know you can do the next thing, and you build a constituency. So yes, so Kevin's gonna say, yes, Mary, that was a brilliant point, right?
So thank you all. I know we went kind of long, and I'm sorry to kind of keep you all waiting and keep you from getting out and home safe. Let's keep fighting. You're already here, so you're doing that, and help everybody else do that same incredibly important work. So thank you all. Thank you for everything you do.